question. I mean, obviously, I'm looking forward to questions. So you guys start typing those puppies out, and because the last couple we haven't been able to get through all the questions. So um, to be honest, I was actually thinking that same question, like, what are we going to jump into? And what I thought, uh, I've talked a little bit about like emotional kung fu, right? Like when we are in a relationship with somebody, we have the ability to uh, we have the ability to help each other heal. We have the ability to hurt each other. And one of the things that I think is a huge challenge for any one of us is when our partner gets defensive. When our or really when we get defensive, right? When we get defensive, it's interesting because we often feel like I'm defensive and yet my partner is attacking. And it's funny because rarely do we say about ourselves, I'm attacking. Um, we typically jump into I'm being defensive because I felt attacked, and the other person's thinking, well, I'm being defensive because I'm feeling attacked. And it's learning about um, what defensiveness really is all about. When we are defensive, that is a really good sign that our wounds are getting hit. And the best way to bring down somebody's defensiveness is to actually lean in. And maybe I should talk a little bit more about leaning in. In fact, how about this? The best thing to do is to slow down. And people are often very, I think, confused by that. When our partner is getting defensive, or when we're getting defensive, even, we can say, hang on, we need to slow this down. I need to understand what just happened, right? The conversation started out, I was trying to express a concern or a frustration about whatever, and suddenly you're upset, you're hurt. What just happened? What did I hit? So you've heard me talk about getting curious, and slowing down is really trying to figure out, let's pause here and just talk about what happened before we go anywhere else, before we get caught into strange conversation or arguments. Let's just focus on what just happened. And if we realize that our defensiveness is coming from a place of wounding, we ask each other, hey, it seems like you're really hurt right now. Maybe your rejection wound is coming up. Many of you have heard me talk about attachment wounds, and the attachment wounds are loss, rejection, abandonment, betrayal, neglect, and abuse. And so even if we don't tell our partner, hey, your abuse wound is coming up, I usually don't suggest that.
I was going to ask about that.
Right? Well, it's interesting how many times I have partners that are trying to connect and trying to communicate, and the other one wants to be like, hey, you're feeling rejection right now. And they might be feeling rejection right now, but it's like calling somebody a victim. You're being a victim right now. And it's like, well, I might be, but now that you pointed out, I'm certainly not going to let you get away with that. And so you're far less likely. I'm sorry, I think I'm funny apparently today, but you're far less likely to get our partner or another individual to recognize that that they feel like a victim when we're telling them that they're a victim, right? We need to slow down and carefully, I say carefully, but lean in and say, hey, what is going on? It seems like it would appear that you're feeling very hurt. Are you feeling rejection from me? Is that what I just hit? Or are you feeling some betrayal from me? Is that the wound I just brought up? And in doing so, I'm doing my best to own what might have come across, what I might have sent, even though I'm not saying I totally tried to reject you. I tried to betray you. Instead, I'm owning, hey, is this what just happened between the two of us? Far more likely to bring somebody's escalation down and to be able to walk into that hurt or that pain or that defensiveness with them. But man, it's hard when their defensiveness feels like an attack to us. So that skill of learning to slow down and lean into the defensiveness is something I thought we could talk a little bit about today. So what do you got, Scott?
Ask us questions. Type into the Q&A feature, please. Our first question is just a comment. Defensiveness is a huge communication blocker, and maybe you can talk a little bit about that, because defensiveness really does sort of slam the door on any sort of reasonable conversation. Well, treat it the way you're suggesting.
Well, right. And that's the crazy thing when you start to realize every single one of us is giving up clues constantly about ourselves. If you guys have ever watched a movie and seen a character being portrayed and you're like, oh, I know what this person struggles with. This person has, this person doesn't trust people or whatever it might be, right? We give up clues constantly as to what we're feeling and thinking. And so if you recognize that defensiveness, yes, it's a communication blocker because it's an empathy blocker, right? Defensiveness blocks empathy, and empathy typically is where connection's going to occur. I understand you, you understand me. I may not even agree with you, but I can appreciate where you're coming from. And if I can understand where you're coming from, we can connect, we can understand each other. So defensiveness, huge communication blocker, but oddly enough, if you can master the art of that Kung Fu, it's a huge window into that person. Now, typically as a partner, we're married or together for an extended period of time. And so we struggle to see our partner's defensiveness or attacking as anything other than an attack. We struggle to see it as a window into their self, right? If you saw somebody having a meltdown at the supermarket, depending on what they're saying, right? But if you saw them having a meltdown, you're going to be like, whoa, what is going on for them? Oh, well, they're really upset about not getting the price they want and the coupon not being accepted. Man, this person really has a lot going on. We don't take it personal. But when we've been with somebody for a long time and they've traumatized us, they've hurt us in the past, or they've rejected us or whatever else, we take it all personal. So it's really difficult not to see their defensiveness as to see it as an opportunity to get into their soul.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, I always think as an addict, because I am one, that especially in early recovery, defensiveness is kind of the default response to everything. And I've always thought that was tied to my denial that I was holding on to. And I see it, anytime I'm working with somebody, they get defensive even with me, and they've come to me for help and honesty and truth and guidance. And you probably see the same thing. And it really, I think it's tied to denial, but am I off base with that, or?
Well, I mean, sure. I think denial is an interesting one because you kind of have to look and go, denial is either I don't want to accept something, or right, like it all gets tied into like gaslighting. What is the person's ability to even have the awareness to look at whether something is true or not? And we think, oh, they're in denial. Well, it might be. They might not want to see that within themselves.
But I also think it's a habit. I mean, denial becomes a habit. The lies and secrets become a habit. The avoidance of truth becomes a habit. And it's just so hard to break that.
Right. Because how often is truth painful? Right. So it isn't strange for us when we say the avoidance of pain becomes a habit. Right. Even if it's true, it can be painful. So we avoid it. Right. So anyway, it's interesting when we start to play with it and understand that most of us, what we're avoiding is pain. And denial is the avoidance of pain. I don't want to deal with the pain that I might be an addict, or I might uh, struggle, or even just have a compulsive problem or an unhealthy habit. It doesn't really matter what it is. I don't want to accept it, because then I would have to face that. I would have to understand more about it, why I developed it. I don't want to admit that I have a flaw. I don't want to admit that I'm unlovable, which is what comes up for the person.
Okay, cool. Let's get to the questions. Sorry, that was a little gnat. This person says the defensiveness feels like gaslighting. How do I slow down enough to not completely shut down, particularly when it feels like gaslighting?
Well, the reality is, it was interesting. I had several sessions with some clients, I think even this week, where we started to talk, like, to be honest, we started to slow down the gaslighting moments. And it's interesting because, again, it's like, if we're in a moment where we feel gaslighted and we tell our partner, stop gaslighting me, right? That is with the assumption that our partner is intentionally gaslighting, that they're sitting there going, how do I make you feel crazy? The difficulty of gaslighting is that to slow it down, we have to actually stop and even just own what our experience is in this moment. Well, if I'm being gaslighted intentionally or unintentionally by somebody, I'm stopping and I'm saying, hey, I don't understand what's going on here. I'm having a very confusing moment, and I feel like I'm trying to share with you my reality. And the message I'm getting back is that my reality is not valid. And I want to know if that's the message you're trying to send me. So slowing down gaslighting is talking about the process of what gaslighting looks and feels like to me, and then asking the other person, are you trying to do this right now? Are you trying to send the message that I'm crazy? Are you trying to send the message that I shouldn't feel the way I feel? Now, they might say, yes, I'm trying to tell you you shouldn't feel the way you feel because you're not seeing it from my perspective. Oh, so you're trying to give me insight as to what your perspective is, as if I understood your perspective, my emotions would go away. Am I getting that correct? Right? So you slow down and start to talk about that experience between the two of you, and you don't even have to throw out the word gaslighting. Now, when you say, how do I slow down enough not to completely shut down? Sometimes it's just saying out loud, I'm really struggling not to shut down completely right now because this is painful, because this feels like I'm being told that I'm crazy, or that my opinion doesn't matter, or that my feelings aren't valid. Are you trying to tell me that? So own that you're feeling like shutting down. And that shutdown could be a freeze response. I know that when my freeze response comes down, I can't logic through it. I just shut down. I freeze. And it isn't until later that I'm able to own that I froze. It's, if we're having a trauma response, it's instant. And we have to learn to slowly work through our trauma responses. I think you're muted, Scott.
I'm muted. Great and relevant topic. I'm an addict, and my partner and I both struggle with getting defensive. When my partner gets triggered, if she is aggressive in her reaction, I get triggered in response. Example, she thinks I'm staring at a woman, I feel accused, I get defensive instead of trying to understand. She believes I'm not being empathetic, and it escalates from there. You already talked about how to de-escalate this somewhat, but curious if you have any more thoughts. Yeah, good question. That's like a really common scenario, I think.
My gosh, that scenario is amazing. It's so common. The truth is, you aren't being empathetic. Now think about this for a minute. You may have a lot of empathy for. Do I have a her there? I may not have a pronoun.
Yeah, it's a him and her.
It is. Okay.
He's the addict. She's not.
Okay. So you may not be. So when we feel attacked, our empathy typically shuts off, right? And that is a scenario, because we've caused so much pain in the past for our partner, that when somebody says to you, I saw what you were doing there, what she's really saying is, hey, I'm scared, and I'm really afraid that you aren't being faithful, that you aren't thinking about me, or that you're caught up in your addiction, that you aren't present, that you don't realize what's going on for you, right? That's typically what she's saying in that moment. And that's what you want to lean into. You can say, even if you own it and say, you know what, I did look sometimes, and this is where you're going to have to do some personal work to figure this out. Sometimes I looked and I was lusting, and I didn't even realize it. Sometimes I looked, I was lusting, and I realized it. Man, the best thing in the world you can do is just own it and say, hey, you know what, I did look, or man, I'll be honest, I didn't think I was looking. And then this is what you want to do as quickly as possible. But it sounds like you're hurting no matter what. Like, whether I looked or not, it sounds like you're hurting. It sounds like you're afraid. Can you tell me more about your fear right now? Right? So the moment I jump into, I wasn't looking, I don't know what you're talking about, that is the exact moment that she feels gaslighted. And you're thinking, I'm not gaslighting. I really didn't look. Right? And guess what? It really doesn't matter whether you're gaslighting or not, because what she's telling you is, I'm in pain. And get this, the coolest part is, she's telling you, can you help me? I'm in pain. I'm hurting. Can you comfort me? So she says, hey, were you looking at that woman? That is her saying, hey, can you comfort me? And it's like, yes, you know what? I can comfort you. Let's talk about what was causing you pain, and let's walk through what happened. And if you aren't that magical, because that takes a lot of work, what you can do is even just stop and say, you know what? I was totally not being empathetic. I was being so defensive right there. And I realized that's not what you needed. You probably feel gaslighted right now, right? Those are a bunch of moves you can do. And you don't need to be perfect. In fact, go mess it up and work through it and learn to recover. People have heard me say before that sometimes the best attachment thing that can occur between two people is the recovery of a mistake. Go blow it and recover from that mistake. Show her that you know how to apologize and own up to it, and lean right into her emotions as quick as you can. So what do you think, Scott? Was that answering that question?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's just, as Matt said, there's no perfect here. And when she's feeling triggered, and almost anything that comes out of your mouth is not going to work, other than to do it, perfectly, and really say, I sense you're feeling some emotions. Can you tell me about, and just to, but, the natural response is, especially if you weren't looking, is to say, no, I wasn't looking. But then you have to follow that up with, I sense that you're feeling something. Can you help me understand what you're feeling? By the fact that I was looking in that general direction and might have been looking at her, or something. I don't know. It's that catch-22. You're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't kind of. It's like almost whatever you say is not going to work the way you want it to.
Right. So that's why you don't spend a whole lot of time talking about what may or may not have happened. Right now, if you can even just pause and say, you know what, I'm not sure if I looked, I'm going to need to think about that, but can we talk about your fear for a moment? Right. Or, as much as you can just kind of own it and lean right into the hurt, or your partner reaching to you. Now, it's hard to see it that way when you feel attacked. They're not reaching to me, they're slapping me. And the truth is, they're slapping you, trying to say, I'm hurt. Can you show up for me, right? They're flailing as they're drowning in the water, saying, help me. And you're mad that they're scratching you. You're mad that they're slapping you. But they're trying to say, keep me from sinking.
Yeah, and just this scenario in general, often this occurs in a restaurant and it's the waitress. um, and I have a sponsee that I work with, and he's married, and he was whining to me. He was complaining one day, whining, whatever we want to call it, about God. Every time we go out to dinner, I pray that we get a waiter because then she won't accuse me of flirting with the waitress. I was
Hmm.
like, well, you need to understand that she's been hurt and she's struggling to regain trust. And then I went out to dinner with him, and he does flirt with the waitresses.
I'm sorry.
And I mean, he like, oh, so what's your name? Are you in school? La da 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 da. And I was just like, are you kidding me? And so he was like completely clueless to the fact that he
Right.
does not treat a waiter that way, but he does treat the waitress that way.
Right.
My God, I'm just being nice. I'm like, no, you're flirting. And if I was your wife, I'd be mad too. So sometimes, in a situation like that, um, you know, what does the guy do? I didn't mean to flirt with her. Can you help me see it from your perspective? Or,
Well, in a situation like that, are you talking about like the wife, or are you talking about your perspective?
well,
Like,
let's say I'm the wife, and I say you're flirting with the waitress. What response is going to, should my husband be, uh, you know, if he thinks he's not, but clearly is. I mean,
yeah,
what?
the what I've found, and I'm not okay, this is not easy, right? If you're a spouse and your husband in this scenario is flirting with the waitress, right? That your best move is usually to say, hey, um, can we talk? I'm curious, to you, what is flirting and what's not flirting?
Yeah,
um I'm wondering what you even perceive. Like, really, at that point, you're trying to dive into the person's reality to figure out like what's flirting. And if he opens up, right, in this scenario, I'm just going to make it up, he might be like, oh well, that's when I'm touching. Like, flirting is when I'm touching somebody, right? I can say whatever I want, but unless I'm touching somebody, I'm not flirting. Really? Right?
yeah.
Okay. So, and then I would try to have a conversation around that. Like, where did that develop? And is there really no other way to flirt than to touch? And
You're
what if
you're
you're treating,
describing the exact conversation I had with this sponsee.
oh,
Well, no,
seriously?
that's if I put my hand on her shoulder or touch her on the arm. I'm like, no, this is early flirting. That's later flirting. You know, this is
Yeah.
foreplay flirting. Testing the
Um,
waters flirting.
Yeah, no, so I mean, that's probably the approach I would try to take, because when it's really only when we get curious with another person do we really start to understand the way that they think, or do we really often even help them to understand the way that we think, right? That's the difficulty with when we come with, dare I call it this, an accusation, right? Our immediate response is to say, no way, that's not true. Because inside, we are totally clueless. I mean, there's a lot of people who I've had to teach that same thing. Like, hey, do you realize how aggressive you feel? Do you realize the presence you bring into a room and how you dominate the room? Do you realize what flirting is or isn't? And a lot of times, no, they've been doing it their whole life this way. And flirting has to be something far over the top. People who are perpetrators, you look at like, uh and I'm not totally into this, and so if I say something offensive, call me out and let's talk through it, by the way. But like, if you look at the Me Too movement, there's a lot of those men, I say men, I think that was mainly the people who were being called out, that were like clueless. It was like they weren't even aware of their abuse of power. They weren't aware of their perpetrating behavior. Like, I'm not excusing them in the slightest. What they were doing is wrong. But at the same time, you have to get somebody the awareness before they can even work on it. And you're not going to get an awareness by attacking them, right? You actually have to have trust with somebody in order for awareness, for them to be able to look and reflect at themselves. Um, I think you need to have trust. And that conversation was probably much easier had with you, Scott, than it would have been with your sponsee's spouse.
Oh yeah.
It doesn't mean that it's not possible with a spouse, but man, a spouse has to be in a pretty secure place to be able to say, hey, can we talk about something? I'm curious. What are your thoughts on this? Where the spouse can sit there going, are you kidding me? How do you not see that you're flirting? And they're angry.
Yeah,
anyway.
Yeah, he was much more willing to listen to me. And I'll just give this advice for the addicts out there. If your wife was a little bird sitting on your shoulder and saw you doing something, would her feathers ruffle? Now, it doesn't matter if she's right or wrong. If you think she's right or wrong to have ruffled feathers, if she has ruffled feathers, you're wrong. Don't do it. Because the addicts have to start seeing things from someone else's perspective, particularly their betrayed partner, and that's a hard thing to do.
Oh, it's really tough.
Yeah. So your previous answer about it's hard to respond well when you're being attacked. This question says defensiveness usually results from an attack. What happens when the betrayed partner has a perception of being entitled to attack based on what many therapists teach? I'm not sure I know any therapists who teach that it's okay to attack. But
I'm going to take a stab at where I think this question is going. And the truth is, anytime you're dealing with a betrayed partner, the betrayed partner needs a lot of validation that they have every reason to be hurt and to feel all the wounds that they're feeling. And so I wonder if when you say they're being taught by other therapists that they're entitled to attack, it's a balance of trying to teach somebody all of your wounds are valid and you have every right to be hurt and upset. But it doesn't mean that we're saying you have permission to hurt somebody else in return. Now, when somebody says the defensiveness usually results from an attack, what I was actually trying to make in the beginning is that it may feel like an attack to you, but if you said, take the scenario we already talked about earlier. You're walking through a store, your spouse turns to you and says, were you looking at that woman? If you feel like that's an attack, you're completely missing it. She's in that scenario trying to tell you, I'm scared. I'm terrified you're not paying attention to me. I'm terrified you're not using your tools. I'm really scared. I'm hurt. I'm afraid that I'm not important to you. That's not an attack at all. That is a cry for connection. And it's a beautiful cry for connection. Now, if you were to tell me that your spouse came to you and said, I hate you, you're a miserable person, nobody loves you, and you said, I felt attacked, I would say, yes, that feels like an attack, right? Even in that moment, though, the question for that spouse who is attacking would be, wow, that's a lot of shame I hear coming up. What happened? What are you feeling right now that you're telling me I'm unlovable? Right? Like, even if it really is an attack, you slow that down. If you want to jump onto a hill that you can die on, go ahead and say, you shouldn't be attacking me. You've learned in therapy that this isn't okay. How dare you feel entitled to attack me, right? You're going to lose every time, because that's the wrong move to make. Even though it's okay that you recognize that it feels like an attack, your best move is to always lean back in and recognize that your partner is telling you that they're in pain. Even if they're telling you you're a miserable, horrible person, they're telling you, I'm hurt, I'm in pain, and I need you. If your spouse is even bothering to yell at you and shame you, that shows you your spouse or your partner is still in. They still want connection with you. I'm not saying it feels good. I'm not saying it's okay, but that's them showing they're still in the game.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. You know, but my question is, I mean, because sometimes we do attack, and sometimes betrayed partners do attack, and
Oh, totally.
sometimes addicts attack right back, and I mean, nobody's blameless here. Do we, and I don't know why this popped into my head, but do we as people tend to attack in the ways that we have been attacked, particularly as children? Maybe do we repeat those behaviors? Do we sort of pay it forward in a yucky way?
Perhaps. I tend to think, though, that we attack most commonly in a way that we learned to protect ourselves. So rather than we attack how we were attacked, I think we tend to attack how we need to protect ourselves. If you're okay, I'm going to go back to that same scenario. You're walking in a grocery store, your spouse says to you, "Were you looking at her?" For her to have the ability to be vulnerable, to say, "Hey, I'm really worried you were looking at her, and that would make me feel like I'm not important to you." That's like otherworldly. Do I think it would be great for her to be able to say that? Yes. But we attack in the way that we protect ourselves. So that attack is, I think, coming from a place of, I'm not willing to admit to you that you have the power to hurt me. And so I'm going to throw at you some other concept, and I'm going to see how you respond before I get vulnerable. So I don't know if that answered your question, Scott.
Yeah, actually, it does. I think it answers it really well. Thank you. How do you get through to an addict if he denies his problem, even after a CSAT tells him he has a problem? Is it even possible to get past his defensiveness and denial? Okay, good question.
That's a great question. Let me answer this. I'm going to answer one part of it, and then I'll probably dive into another part. So, is it even possible to get past his defensiveness and denial? And let me say it this way. Is it possible that some people won't allow you to get past their defensiveness and denial? Yes. I think that's possible, that some people will not let you get past their defensiveness and denial. Do I have hope that almost everybody has the ability to have somebody get past their defensiveness and denial? Me personally, I do. Now, it may not come from me. They may need a therapist that's skilled differently than I am, or has certain qualities different than mine, or it may not even be a therapist. They may have a wall to therapy and therapists, and they need some other human being to somehow reach them. But I believe that most people have some way that we can get past that. Are they going to let their spouse do it? Sometimes, and I've said this before in previous webinars, sometimes the spouse is the last person they truly get vulnerable with. It's like they're the biggest, scariest person to get vulnerable with. And so, again, just like Scott's example earlier, it may take going to dinner with your sponsor for you to realize what your spouse has been saying to you for years. So is it possible? Yes. Does it take probably a lot of empathy and compassion on your part as a partner? Yeah, if you're going to get through, it's going to take a lot of empathy and compassion. Do I think that is such a great injustice because you are the one that is needing empathy and compassion as much as anybody? Yes. So it's always this great injustice that a partner has to learn empathy and compassion, oftentimes far before somebody struggling with an addiction learns empathy and compassion. It's a great injustice. So,
and it stinks that he'll listen to his sponsor and his therapist and his fellows in recovery and hear it in a way that he doesn't hear it with you. That stinks, but it
Oh,
is the way that it works almost all the time.
it is awful. I hate it. I've had spouses say, I've been trying to say that for years, and they're so mad. And it's usually, it really isn't even about the spouse. I mean, it can be for so many different reasons. Nobody that's really close to that person would have ever been able to say it. It had to be somebody who had enough distance, but yet still had trust that they could finally hear it. I think it's complicated, but hopefully that helps.
Yeah, and just to address is it possible to get past his defensiveness and denial in the Alcoholics Anonymous big book, and I'm going to mangle this, but it says there are people who don't recover. And then it explains why they can't recover. It says they are incapable of being honest with themselves and others. They just can't get past their denial and their defensiveness, and they'll never recover if they do. And I do think it's possible. I agree with Matt. There are people out there who just can't get honest and will, never going to get past it. But the vast majority of people can, if they're willing.
Yeah, I like how you said that. They're unwilling to get past their denial. And what was the other piece?
If they're just incapable of being honest.
Yeah,
with themselves and others.
Their dishonesty.
Yeah, I mean, honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness. I'm spouting AA all of a sudden, but those are the three foundations of recovery: honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness. If you can be honest, that's step one. If you can be open-minded, great. You can take in some advice, and if you're willing, that means you're willing to listen and willing to take action. And some people aren't, sadly.
Yeah.
So. Okay, next one here. Is it unrealistic for the betrayer, this is the addict, to expect the betrayed partner to be calm and say, can you comfort me? Instead of the betrayed partner getting upset, overthinking, et cetera, et cetera. Also with the subject of flirting, the addict thinks flirting is having a romantic interest in that person. So communicating with another woman on Facebook is technically not flirting in his opinion. What do you think? So two separate questions there. So let's take the first one. Is it unrealistic for the betrayer to expect the betrayed partner to be calm and say, can you comfort me?
Is it unrealistic for the betrayer to expect the betrayed to be calm? I think expectations is another conversation. And so I'm going to talk about that for a quick second. I had a friend of mine one time essentially teach me that expectations are premeditated resentment. And the way that I like to look at it is expectations are usually unstated needs. And so we have to be careful with the term or even the understanding of an expectation. Do I think it's unrealistic for a betrayed partner to be calm and say, can you comfort me? Well, in many ways, it is unrealistic depending on where you're at in the recovery process, right? If the partner who's struggling with an addiction hasn't really shown that they can comfort their betrayed partner, then I think it's pretty unrealistic for a betrayed partner to be vulnerable enough to be calm and say, can you comfort me? Now, ideally, is that where I'm trying to help my betrayed partners get to? Sure, absolutely. And do I help a lot of betrayed partners get there? Absolutely. But is that like after a lot of recovery work? Yes. And so do I think it's unrealistic? Well, it depends on when you're asking, right? Early in recovery, yeah, it's totally unrealistic. It isn't going to happen. There's not enough trust built up. Now, do I think, is it unrealistic that a spouse struggling with addiction can learn to hear it that way? I'm trying to teach them to learn to hear it that way, that's what she's really saying when she says, did you just look at that woman, right? Because it's a dual process. I think the betrayed partner needs to learn over time to stay calm and say, can you comfort me? And the person struggling with the addiction needs to learn over time to hear, wow, you're in pain. Can I comfort you? And so I hope that answers your question. Yes, it's unrealistic, and no, it's not unrealistic. It really just depends on where you're at in recovery, and not just the betrayed partner, but where you both are in recovery. If I have somebody struggling actively with an addiction, I'm not going to ask them to comfort me. They can't even comfort themselves, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and I'm going to spout some more AA since I seem to be on that track today. Since
Yeah.
you brought up expectations, big AA saying expectations are a resentment waiting to happen, and resentments will get you drunk. So yeah, you
Resentments
gotta
will get you what?
resentments will get you drunk.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
That's the AA saying. If you carry your resentments around long enough, you will drink, and they're not
Yeah.
wrong. So yeah, putting expectations onto someone, whether it's the addict or the betrayed partner, is kind of a bad idea.
Absolutely. So hopefully that was helpful and answered your question. We're probably going to have time. So if you have a follow-up to that piece of the question, jump back into the
Yeah.
question and answer.
Yeah, and you can never control another person's behavior. You can only control your own thoughts and behavior. You can't control the other person. They're going to do what they do. It's how you choose to respond is what you have control over. So if you can read it as "Can you comfort me?" instead of "I hate you, you're a jerk," then you're ahead of the game.
Yeah, and absolutely. Should I jump into the next question?
Yeah, what is flirting?
Okay, so I'm going to actually read this question again because I think it's actually an excellent question. Also, with the subject of flirting, my betrayer husband thinks flirting is having a romantic interest in that person. So communicating with another woman on Facebook is technically not flirting in his opinion. What do you think? So if in fact your betrayer husband, as you put it, if he in fact thinks that flirting is having a romantic interest, then my response to that would be, I wonder if he thinks that gardening is only harvesting fruits or vegetables from the garden, because when somebody, you may not have a romantic interest in somebody, but when you're talking to them, you're watering the seeds. And that's the dangerous part. Now, the problem you run into is he going to get defensive hearing me say this? Probably. And so I would want to find out more about why he's developed that line of thinking. Why is it that flirting is only if there's a romantic interest, right? Because there's a lot of people that I don't have a romantic interest in, but I might be very friendly to, and I'm really sowing the seeds for relationships to go other places. Even if there's not a romantic interest, even if I actually don't want the relationship to go other places, if I'm sowing the seed and then I get a positive response, well, that's a great way for me to use the excuse of, well, I wasn't flirting, she came after me, right? And that's just not the case. If I'm not professional, if I'm not leaving doors closed, right, and I'm just opening the door and somebody walks through, I have to say, hey, I can't have you walk through this door. This isn't okay. I don't know if that makes sense what I'm trying to say here. Is it, Scott? I'm getting a
Yeah,
look.
I really think it does. It was kind of, I was talking about, my sponsee with the waitress, and he's like, no, I'm not touching her. I'm like, you might as well be, it's like, even if you have no interest in her, you are treating her differently than you would treat the waiter. You're being much friendlier with, it's flirting. I'm sorry. And he just wants the validation from her that, he wants her to flirt back and validate him.
Right.
And I think that,
and then once he gets that, he might then feel tempted to touch her.
Right.
And then he thinks, well, it's not my fault. She was flirting with me.
Yeah.
And it's like your lack of awareness that you were sowing the seed, right? It's one thing to say, hey, where are you from? And, get to know somebody a little bit. But you're right. Are you treating men and women the same in that regard? And if you're not, what's going on for you that you are wanting attention? Because I guarantee you, if a waitress knows how to do her job, she's going to give that back because
Yeah.
she wants a bigger tip.
Yes.
I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy.
And
At
then
least
this
that's
goes
how.
back to my little birdie on the shoulder. Is your little wife Birdie going to ruffle her feathers when if she saw this?
Well, but again, he would have to have the awareness
Yeah, you need some awareness.
that that would even occur. So I hope this answers the last question. Do I think it's flirting? I believe that if he doesn't believe it's flirting, he's probably right in that sense, but he's clueless as how he's opening the door for flirting to be received and then him to go off and do unhealthy things with it. Do I technically think it's flirting? Yeah. Flirting is really just sowing the seeds of connection with
Yeah, and
anybody.
and he's also clueless about how his behavior, whether it's nefarious or not in its intent, is impacting you. And that was the point I was trying to make with my addict
Right.
Fonzie is, dude, you have to understand how your wife sees this.
Totally. Because
because
guess what? I don't
it
care
looks
whether you
like
think
flirting
it's,
to her.
yeah, it doesn't matter if your wife thinks it's flirting or not. Does it hurt her? That's
Yeah,
really the only thing that matters.
yeah. I mean, run it through her filter, not yours, and her
Uh-huh.
filter is different than yours.
Yeah,
So
you got to think for a second and go, hey, am I drunk right now? Maybe you better drive.
yeah, yeah. My husband would like to forget that his 13-year addiction deeply hurt me. He had a 6-year emotional chart room affair. I don't know what that means, but it
I
sounds
think a
like
chat
affair.
room is probably what it
Oh,
was.
chat room, maybe. Heavy sexual fantasy, F&M, it might be S&M, and went on for 7 years. Chat room, sexual interactions, and porn. He's going through the motions of going to 12 steps and other drop-in rooms. I assume that might be on our website. We've been married for 49 years. I do not want to leave, but what can I do to help him understand and save our marriage? I am actively in individual therapy and support groups. What should I do?
Um, let's see here. What can I do to help him understand? Gosh, honestly, my first response to you, my instinctual response to you in this situation is to say the best thing you can do is just keep working on you. Because if he's this early in recovery, well, I guess I don't know how early in recovery he is. But my push to you is to strengthen your support system. I mean, I'm just doing some quick math and I'm guessing about how old you might be. If you've been married for 49 years, you're in a population that it's really important for you to have a good support system around you. And it's not going to probably be as easy to find. So, especially with COVID, because that might be a more high risk population. And so, but for you to go in and get the support system you need around you to find people who can help you to validate you and the pain that you've felt for all of these years, what can you do to get him to realize? It would be honestly get yourself as secure and solid as you can, and as much as possible be vulnerable with him about how painful and scary it's been, and make sure to let him know how much you want connection with him, but that ultimately it's up to him to decide if you guys are going to get close. It's tough because you say a 13-year addiction. If you guys have been married 49 years, my guess is this isn't 13 years. Whether he's addiction hopped, did he have some other addiction going on before that? I just have a hard time believing that he developed an addiction this late in his life without having previous other addictions going on. My guess would be that he struggles to know how to do connection at all. And so he's got to learn how to connect, quite possibly for the first time in his life, at at quite an age, if that makes sense. Is it doable? Absolutely. It's going to take some time. It's probably going to be slow, but hang in there and do your work. And hopefully that answers your question well enough.
Yeah, we have older men in our treatment center all the time, and they really make significant breakthroughs. And what they
Oh,
find out is they've had a lifetime, they've had a 49-year marriage where they were never fully present. Uh,
totally.
yeah.
And
Um,
I've worked with a lot of guys that are in that age range, and they can do amazing recovery, and
yes.
they can learn how to connect, and it's beautiful. I mean, I'm having several clients pop into my head right away that I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I've seen them do some of the best work, um, and but it takes, them really taking a look at their past and trying to figure out, even if they've been lusting their whole life and not realizing how that's gone on, or maybe even alcohol abuse or some other type of abuse. I mean, but yeah, I find it hard to believe that they've developed an addiction that late.
Yeah, I would agree. And I also agree with what you said about taking care of yourself first, because you can't clean up his side of the street. Only he can do that. So just, get yourself as strong as you can, and then you'll be able to deal with whatever you have to deal with. When will my sex addict husband be honest with himself and stop lying to himself and me? He goes to 12-step meetings and couples therapy, but this has been 18 months. I feel like I'm beating my head against the wall. Please advise.
Oh man.
Yeah, tough one.
Okay. Well, that is a tough one because I don't know how to say this. I don't know what the breakthrough is going to take. I guess my push in a situation like this is, have you seen some progress? Like, are you seeing, even if it's slow, are you seeing some progress, some um, integral moments where you can see things are catching hold and changes are being made? And even if it's slow, that's one of those that it's like, man, I'm sorry, you're dealing with a sloth. But you know, but if you're not seeing any progress and it's been that way for 18 months, and this is just continual lying to himself and others, yeah, I bet you it just even if you are seeing progress, it can feel like you're beating your head against the wall. But as far as what advice I would give you, very similar to the last one, keep doing your work, build up your support system, keep yourself in a healthy place, and keep moving forward as best you can in the relationship until it either breaks through and gets better or it doesn't, and you have to move on. I know that may sound really strange, but I don't know that I have a whole lot else in that scenario.
Yeah, so this is a follow-up to our flirting. So the betrayer here has weighed in. Some people have a gregarious personality and enjoy dialogue and interaction with other human beings. I see flirting as grooming with intent due to romantic interest, cracking a joke, or having a deep dialogue. Women, is this flirting? Question mark. I just don't think so. Clearly didn't listen to us.
No, so here's the hard part, because what I hear him saying right now is trying to figure out, how do I have healthy connection with a woman, and how do I avoid opening a door for flirtation? And I think it's actually a really good question. At the same time, the scary part is, when I'm dealing with somebody who's early in recovery, is I will say, is there any chance you're going to do anything unhealthy with your cousin or a sister or an aunt? Right? Can we identify people for you to learn how to have deep dialogue with that isn't going to turn unhealthy? Right? Can we find some people who we trust that you can practice having deep dialogue with? Because you finding random women on Facebook is a recipe for disaster. You finding people you flirt, yeah, let me back that up. You having deep dialogue with the waitress, that doesn't even make sense. It's your waitress. You don't need to have deep dialogue. Cracking a
By the
joke.
way, this is I have a gregarious personality. My sponsee literally said, I have a gregarious personality. I'm like this with everyone. And I pointed out that no, you're not. You don't.
Well,
You
and
just
that's what
with
I'm
the
going
waiter.
to have you take a look at. It's okay to have a gregarious personality. It's okay enjoying dialogue with everybody else. What you want to be careful of are two things. One, it doesn't matter whether you have a gregarious personality or not. It doesn't matter whether you really are flirting or not. Be sensitive to your spouse. Lean into her pain. She is valid, right? Now, with her, start to explore. How do I have a gregarious personality? How do I enjoy connection with others while creating safety for you and me learning to have healthy connection with other people? Because you, spouse, are more important than anybody else. But it's okay that I learn how my gregarious personality affects other people, but pay attention to yourself and how that works for you. I actually think it's a great question. I actually do think you guys are trying to wrestle and figure this out. You both have valid concerns coming up, but ultimately, leaning into your wife's pain here, or your spouse, I think you said spouse pain, right?
Yeah.
Spouse, leaning into your partner's pain here is really the most important thing to do. Most likely what you're feeling like is your partner is telling you right now, I'm the authority. I'm the mom or dad in your life telling you what you can and can't do. And right now you're kind of like, I will not let you tell me what to do. How dare you be the authority in my life? And the truth is, your spouse is probably saying, hey, this is scary to me. I want you to take a look at this. And you're saying, I'm not willing to take a look. I think you're out of line. So learn how to lean in there together and figure out how to soften that dialogue and say, if your pain makes sense to me. And let's explore this together.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, I'm just personally, I'm having a feeling about this. I'm trying hard not to get mad, because you really need to understand that you are married to this woman who loves you, and you might want to show her some consideration. If she thinks it's flirting, stop doing it.
Well, Scott, slow down. Are you defensive right now?
I am.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I want you to notice, how empathetic are you being to the man who's struggling?
I'm not married, but I'm trying.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's probably very validating to the spouse on here. But unless we get into the empathy with him, we're probably not going to be able to help him see this.
Yeah.
Your anger most likely is going to show up and just be some angry man in his life telling him that he's dumb.
And here I am. I don't even know either of these individuals, so I can only imagine what your wife is feeling. And I understand. I do understand what you're feeling, because you don't see it as flirting.
Yeah.
But yeah. So I do have some empathy.
Scott, you are totally valid in having that anger, and I bet his spouse here like feels really validated, and I hope she does, because your anger makes sense to me. But I can see him trying to wrestle through this, and he's having a hard time. To me, it sounds like he doesn't know how to even have a dialogue. He's just being told he's wrong. Well, the truth is, he probably needs to look and explore a lot of this, but we're not going to be able to help him do that if we just tell him he's the broken addict and he's wrong.
Right.
So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah. So we're out of time. We've actually run over by about 5 minutes, but Matt and I both had our happy pills today, I think. So we're glad you all sat with us through this. We will see you maybe the day after Thanksgiving, or maybe not. We'll post it on the website. Matt, just let me know, and I'll take care of it.
I'll let you know. Probably, honestly, it'll be the first week of December at this point.
So we'll see you most likely in December. So, all right. Have a good Thanksgiving if I don't see you, Matt, and everybody else the same.
Keep it up.